Hello and welcome to Reread. Today we are talking about Paradise Lost by John Milton. This book has showed up in a couple of the recent videos that I've been talking about, and another cool thing about this is that this is actually a reread. I think the only other reread that I've ever talked about on a channel was an old video that I made about Dune, like 3 years ago now, and it was exciting because the first time I read Paradise Lost was maybe 2 years ago, I think, and when I read it I was like, wow, that was good. I didn't get it. And I talk about this a little bit in one of my recent-ish videos where I was with my housemate and we were talking about reading Shakespeare, where after having read some Shakespeare, I've come back to Paradise Lost and it feels like I really unlocked something. And so this time when I went through and read it, I don't know how much it's because of it being a reread or how much it's because of me just having practiced reading complicated English verse. But yeah, the reading at this time, I was all aboard. I was following everything, and I'm just like, man, this is such a ball. So I liked it enough that I feel confident now talking about it and sharing some of my favorite scenes. Basically, there are three things that I want to talk about that stood out to me in Paradise Lost. One of them's kind of funny, but two of them are just interactions that happen between Adam and Eve that I really like, and I feel like maybe get a little bit overshadowed because, let's be honest, for good reason, a lot of the fanboying and fangirling that happens in Paradise Lost happens around the character of Satan. Milton famously created this very charismatic figure in Satan that is what just a lot of people talk about. And although I liked it, of course, I feel like when I just sat down to list the moments that really stood out to me, I was more inspired to talk about particular things that happened in the Garden of Eden. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I have a list of some extracts that I want to read, and I'll also have the extracts on screen so that you can follow along. And the good thing is that through those extracts we'll also come across the memorable scenes that I want to talk about. But maybe the first thing, I realized I forgot to write this, but a lot of people talk about Dante and the scene in the Divine Comedy where Dante meets up with all of the other epic poets and he joins them and they're like, oh yeah, Dante, come, and people kind of give Dante some flack for that, where they say, oh wow, you were like 2 books into your magnum opus that you hadn't even written yet, and you're calling yourself an epic poet. Like, come on, dude, don't you think that's a bit supercilious? And the more I read epic poetry, the more I realize that this is just a thing that all epic poets do. Like, of course there's the idea of invoking the muse, but often epic poets do just acknowledge the fact that they are working within a tradition of epic poetry, and that's just... And the way that Dante did it, of him sort of meeting the manifestations of the epic poets in hell. I mean, let's read how Milton starts Paradise Lost, which I have talked about this before. I talked about this in a video, top 10. A storm is coming. Oh, and someone's running outside. Oh no, it's raining. What a great rainy day. What a perfect weather for talking about epic poetry. Oh my. I would send a photo out, but then we'd just get like Rainbolt who would dox me and show you all where I live. But rest assured, there's a great storm brewing outside. Should have talked about King Lear today. Anyway, back on track. So, Milton starts his poem, and I talked about this in my video of like 5 great opening lines, but Milton just comes out after invoking the oracle. He says, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. Dude, just unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. So, I mean, in fairness, he's just saying, I'm going to try something unattempted yet, which I'm sure I could have a crack at doing something unattempted, Maybe not, actually. I feel like after the Ulipo school, like, there's really nothing's been unattempted. And I also think about John Barth. He had a line, I don't know if he said this in his essay, The Literature of Exhaustion, or if he said it somewhere else, but Barth once said, quote, "In the 20s, Ezra Pound said make it new, but by the time it got to the 40s, making it new had already become old." But anyway, enough dawdling. Man, I'm just going to be looking outside at the rain. It is really it is really coming down. Whoa, mama. Anyway, let's get started talking about some of these extracts. This is a scene from the first book. This is just a turn of phrase that I like, so I won't linger on it for too long. But Milton describing the rabble of fallen angels in hell, where he says, "The heads and leaders thither haste were stood to great..." Wow, is it too loud? Oh my god. Oh man, it is fucking pissing down. You know what? I'm just gonna do it, and then if it's too loud, we'll move on. Oh, we'll refilm it. But Milton writes, "The heads and leaders thither haste were stood, their great commander, godlike shapes and forms, excelling human, princely dignities, and powers that erst in heaven sat on thrones, though of their names in heavenly records now be no memorial, blotted out and razed by their rebellion from the books of life." And I feel like the idea of legacy or of being remembered, or like specifically the criticizing devils and fallen angel figures by saying, "I could talk about you, but I won't because I'm going to let your name be forgotten." I feel like that's a recurring theme in Paradise Lost. Another delightful turn of phrase. He just says, "Yet faithful how they stood, their glory withered, as when heaven's fire hath scathed the forest oaks or mountain pines, with singed top their stately growth, though bare, stands on the blasted heath." I think I'm really just a fan of the word heath ever since the Arno Schmidt novella, Brands Heath. Heath. I feel like it's a word that's really underused, heath. It's getting dark. We're really getting into a gloomy, if this video survives, it'll be a miracle. In part 2, so this is after the pandemonium, and they're all trying to decide or negotiate the best way to strike back at heaven. And they've decided that someone is going to, infiltrate and do what Satan is about to do, but they haven't decided who is going to do it. And Milton has this quite humanizing way of describing them, where he says, "But all sat mute, pondering the danger with deep thoughts, and each in other's countenance read his own dismay, astonished." And that just felt like it sort of snapped us from, these are mythical, angelic, devilish figures to kind of soldiers standing arm in arm together. Often, I don't know, do I feel like Milton does a good job with that? I feel like he does a really good job with embodiment in this, and with making us really feel the dimensions of characters, especially Satan and Adam. Milton actually coming out with a sublime description here, and I don't mean sublime in the just general good, good description. I mean in the way of actually describing a sublime scene where Satan is infiltrating heaven, and he sees this staircase where, quote, "Satan from hence now on the lowest stair that scaled by steps of gold to heaven gate looks down with wonder at the sudden view of all this world at once." And that's kind of like a sublime vertigo feeling that I really love. Good job, Milton. You know what, the rain's not too much, we can keep going now, I reckon. One of the lines that often gets brought up is when quoting Paradise Lost again comes from book 1. I feel like Paradise Lost has got a little bit of a Don Quixote effect, where the most quoted things are just from the first 12th of the book. But in one of the famous quotes is, of course, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. But in book 4, there's a little bit of a kind of development on that phrase, which I like a little bit more, and so I wanted to share with you. "Me miserable, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair? Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell, and in the lowest deep a lower deep, still threatening to devour me, opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven." But here we get the great catty back and forth between Gabriel and Satan. So we start where Satan Satan says, Gabriel, thou hadst in heaven the esteem of wise, and such I held thee. But this question asked puts me in doubt. And I'm just like, oh, damn. But then Gabriel claps right back when he looks at Satan and says, but wherefore thou alone? Wherefore with thee came not all hell broke loose? Is pain to them less pain, less to be fled, or thou than they less hardy to endure? Oh! So basically Satan's calling Gabriel an idiot, and Gabriel's calling Satan a sissy. What more could you want from your epic poetry? This is just like, I sometimes joke that when I say, oh, what's an epic poem? An epic poem is just anything that when you read it, you say, oh, wow, that's epic. But sometimes it is fun when you actually find something that you read it and you're like, wow, that's epic. And this is Milton describing the fight between Michael and Satan, which effectively was the fall of Satan. And he writes, but the sword of Michael from the armoury of God was given him tempered so that neither keen nor solid might resist that edge. It met the sword of Satan with steep force to smite descending, and in half cut sheer nor stayed, but with swift wheel reverse, deep entering sheared all his right side. Then Satan first knew pain. Milton, in this really nice way, somehow describes maybe this feeling of beatitude, where it's the very start of book 8, and he writes, so this is all while Raphael is just talking to Adam, sort of recounting the history of what happened before Adam was born. And the start of book 8 is, the angel ended, and in Adam's ear so charming left his voice that he awhile thought him still speaking, still stood fixed to hear, then as new waked thus gratefully replied. And yeah, I really like that image of the kind of lingering reverberations of the angel speaking, that it's kind of like, I feel like we can easily translate that into lingering reverberations of music that we hear, or just some sublime sound. But it was a great start to a book. Okay, so now we're jumping to the section where Satan has wiled his way into the garden, and he's talking to Eve. He's trying to convince her to eat of the fruit of knowledge. And so firstly he starts flattering her and says, Queen of this universe, do not believe those rigid threats of death. Ye shall not die. How should ye? By the fruit? It gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener? Look on me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life more perfect have attained than fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. So it's a little bit of a compliment. But then he comes out with the pristine logic, and he says, knowledge of good and evil. Of good, how just. Of evil, if what is evil be real, why not known, since easier shunned? And I'm just going to go ahead and say, look, I would have fallen for it. Dude. I would have eaten it. I'm not blaming Eve for a moment, dude. I would have eaten that shit even without the serpent, dude. I would have just waited till God was gone and eaten it straight away. But now we get into one of the sections that I really, really love. One of the key moments that I don't know if this is explored a lot, but it is the brief period in between when Eve had eaten of the fruit and Adam had not yet eaten. Because when Adam eats of the fruit, almost immediately they look at each other and they express this carnal desire, and then they copulate, etc., and big old grievous sin. But I remember that when Eve eats of the fruit, she experiences this prolonged, seemingly reasonable, rational euphoria. I'm kind of just reading all of this as like the different experiences of orgasm. But one thing that I love is after Eve finally eats, firstly Milton drops in a little bit when she eats. He writes, earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat sighing through all her works gave signs of woe that all was lost. Great image, but not as interesting to me as this. He writes, this is Eve narrating her experience. Experience next to thee I owe best guide, not following thee. I had remained in ignorance. Thou openest wisdom's way, and givest access, though secret she retire, and I perhaps am secret. And I'm really, really fascinated in this sort of because obviously, following the tradition and following the history and whatnot, a lot of the language that talks about Eve is from this like submissive, being part of man and whatnot, and being the counterpart to man. But there's two scenes that really, really stick with me. There's one, how she is described as perceiving the world after eating the fruit, before Adam eats it and before she really experiences the carnal desire. And then the next one that we will talk about is at the very end, but I have a couple of extracts to get through first, but we're very close to there. Just adding on to this higher state, or this higher awareness that Eve has when she's trying to convince Adam to eat. She says, "But I feel far otherwise the event, not death, but life augmented. Opened eyes, new hopes, new joys, taste so divine, that what of sweet before hath touched my sense, flat seems to this, and harsh." Look, I know that there's going to be this whole diatribe later about like removing the film of the fake knowledge, and when like Adam is hearing about the prophecies. But I'm interested in what Eve is experiencing, and I think that there's Gnostic traditions that talk about that, but I don't really know anything about those Gnostic traditions. So if anyone in the comment section knows, please do let me know, because I would like to read about that. Just before we move on from carnal love, I really, really have to point out, and thank you again to Callum for mentioning this to me so that I knew to keep an eye out for it. But right at the end of book 8, Adam is talking with Raphael, and basically Raphael is just talking about how great being in a relationship is, and Adam, in a very kind, considerate way, basically asks hey, do angels get to experience that same satisfaction? And he's kind of sort of saying do angels experience sex or intimacy? Not sex, but kind of sort of sex, or I'm reading it as sex. And he says, so Adam says, quote, "Love not the heavenly spirits, and how their love express they, by looks only, or do they mix irradiance, virtual or immediate touch?" And then the angel, with a smile that glowed celestial rosy red, so he is blushing, love's proper hue, answered, "Let it suffice thee that thou know'st us happy, and without love no happiness." So we know that there's angel sex, and that Milton spent at least a portion of his time thinking about angel sex. And I know that he goes on to describe that doesn't happen, but we know that Milton was like, look, let's not talk about it, but angels maybe do have sex. And then we get the first domestic that happens. So after they eat of the fruit, and then they copulate, and then they wake up, and Adam's a sad boy, and Eve... The other interesting thing is we don't really know how Eve is feeling until Adam starts to criticize her, and they have this domestic that is just the meme where it's just you walk in the house and the mum and dad are arguing, and these are capital M mum, capital D dad. But Eve comes out with some fire where she says, "Which who knows but might as ill have happened thou being by, or to thyself perhaps, hadst thou been there, or here the attempt, thou couldst not have discerned fraud in the serpent, speaking as he spake, no ground of enmity between us known. Why should he mean me ill, or seek to harm? Was I to have never parted from thy side, as good have grown there still a lifeless rib." Oh, Milton knows how to have a feminist line when he needs to. As good have grown there still a lifeless rib. So in the last book, where God says, okay, we need to kick them out of the Garden of Eden, but if they play ball, then what we'll do is we'll tell Adam the prophecy of how life is going to go after him, so that he can at least go with some form of confidence. And meanwhile, they've allegedly lulled Eve into a sleep, and they are feeding her similar thoughts and similar things. However, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Because at the end, they say, Michael instructs Adam to go waken Eve, her also I with gentle dreams have calmed, portending good, and all her spirits composed to meek submission. Thou at season fit let her with thee partake what thou hast heard, chiefly what may concern her faith to know, the great deliverance by her seed to come, for by the woman's seed on all mankind. And of course, we get the, when you feel it's appropriate, you're welcome to tell her some of the prophecies. But here's the crazy thing. He goes there, lay sleeping ran before, but found her waked, and thus with words not sad she him received, whence thou returnest, and whither wentst I know. Eve knows, dude. Eve knows. And that's the most interesting thing. That's one of the most interesting things that happened in Paradise Lost for me. Eve knows. She was already awake. Eve knows. But that's all I'm going to say about Paradise Lost. This was a bit of an adventurous video. We kind of lived through a small storm with me, just in reading. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed some of these notes about Paradise Lost. And what were some of your favorite scenes from the book that you would like to share? If you haven't read any epic poems, of course, hang out. I am going to be making a video about epic poetry in general soon. But yeah, for now, I will leave you to keep on reading, keep enjoying literature, and I'll see you all in the next video.